What is going on, comic fam? It's your boy, the bearded comic bro, and I am joined by comic creator Ron Marz. Welcome to the show.
Hey man, thanks for having me.
Man, I'm excited. Just getting to talk to you. If you're watching this show and you've never heard of Ron, you probably haven't been reading comics because you've worked on Green Lantern, you've worked on Silver Surfer, Witchblade, DC versus Marvel, some amalgam, like you across the board, and now you're currently working on Almost American and also Silver Surfer Rebirth. So like you've had some fair share of time in the game.
I've been doing it for 30 years, so I've played with most of the toys and some of them twice, like Surfer now.
Yeah. Well, I always like to know when I bring a creator on, did you always have a love for comics, or did this kind of come about when you got into creating comics?
I, like everybody else, when I was a kid, I loved comics. I, had, a stack of Avengers and a stack of X-Men, and then, you get to be a teenager and you just discover other things that take your interest. And I didn't look at comics again until like the very end of my senior year in high school.
Okay.
I stumbled across a little comic display in the local mall and kind of got back into, oh, this is cool. There's a Teen Titans X-Men crossover. How is that possible? So I got pulled in by a couple of different books that I found there, and then started to haunt the spinner racks at the local deli and at the local supermarkets, because I didn't, at that point, I didn't really know that there was such a thing as a comic book store.
Right.
And then once I got into college, I figured out, oh, there's a comic book store. Okay. And so that's where a big chunk of my money went. And then, not too long into my college career, I sort of met the comics community in the Hudson Valley here in New York State, where I grew up, which was Bernie Wrightson and Jim Starlin, Joe Staten, Fred Hembeck, Terry Austin. And Jim Starlin's the one that sort of eventually kind of took me by the hand and led me into Marvel and said, here, you should do this.
Nice. Well, I always, because then I always like to know how that transition from, getting into comics to then creating comics. So it sounds like, so how did you said you kind of discovered the community, which is a pretty fantastic community, listening off the names that you said there.
Yeah.
And that,
Obviously very fortunate. So I, when I was both in high school and college, I interviewed Bernie Wrightson, who lived in Woodstock, which I grew up in Kingston. Woodstock's 15 minutes away. So I ended up meeting Bernie by going to interview him as a kid. And he invited me to his Halloween party when I was, I guess, a freshman in college. He invited me to his, famed Halloween party that he had in the studio. And that's where I started to meet the rest of the community, even though obviously everybody was in costume and he didn't know who anybody was. But I just sort of got brought into that group by Bernie and Jim principally, and ended up starting to play, play volleyball with them, play racquetball with them, go out to eat, go out to see movies. Those guys just developed into my social circle. And then while I was still in college, I was working at the local newspaper as a sports reporter. So I was always a writer, like from the time I was out of high school, I was actually making a living as a writer. And Jim asked me to copy edit his first prose novel, which was Among Madmen, I believe. I think that was the first one that we did, because we did a few of them. So he wrote a novel with his then wife. I copy edited it. He liked what I was doing well enough that he said, you should try writing comics. Which is, and this, I tell this story all the time. That's like somebody saying, you should try playing center field for the Yankees.
right.
Of course, that's the thing you want to do, but you don't ever actually get to do that. But when Jim Starlin says you should do this and teaches you how to do it, co-writes your first few issues, and then introduces you around up at the Marvel offices, you get to do it. And in my case, you keep doing it for 30 years.
That's fantastic. So, I mean, yeah, it's so cool to hear, like you said, like you started interviewing Bernie and then you got to meet Jim and all the other creators. And so Jim kind of then helped you get in the door at Marvel, because Silver Surfer was one of your earlier books, correct?
Was my first book.
It was your very first.
The first comic script I ever wrote was a Silver Surfer, Silver Surfer annual. That was, I think it was the first one that I wrote. It wasn't the first one that came out. I think some of the issues that the regular issues that I co-wrote with Jim came out before it, but the annual was the thing that I wrote first, and it sat in the drawer for a while until it came out in the summer. So yeah, so like I never did a spec script, I never did a pitch, I never did any of this, small press, any of the stuff that people have to go through now for years to actually, start doing this as a living or even as a hobby. I didn't have to do any of that stuff. So I am very well aware of how fortunate I am.
That's all. So, so if a young inspiring creator is watching this, just become friends with creators and get you.
Yeah. I've actually had people say, like they ask for your breaking in story, and I tell them that one. And, and then the next question is, can you introduce me to Jim Starlin?
You're like, I need that. So what was it like then for you, because to come out the gates with Silver Surfer, a property, it's well known with Marvel, like, was there just nerves at first, or because you were kind of being trained by some of the elite in the game at that, it wasn't as much nerves as one might think?
Well, I mean, there were nerves just because it was a new thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, I don't know, 23 years old or something like that. So I was still a kid, basically. But I figured out that I could do it. I mean,
right.
fairly early on, I was like, oh, I know how to do this. Like I would look at the other books on the stands and I could, I can do that. So I honestly never lacked for confidence. It wasn't an imposter syndrome sort of situation or anything. Like I had one of the, grandmasters of the business show me how to do this. And I learned it, and he kind of bumped me back into the middle of the road when I would do something that didn't quite work. So I approached it with a fair amount of confidence that I could do this. I could do this just as well as the next guy. Right from the beginning, I guess having worked at a daily newspaper and been a reporter as well as an editor at a daily newspaper from a young age, I had the confidence of doing that. Like I had the confidence of being a professional in a business with people who were, much more senior to me, much more mature, much more experienced than me. But I found that I could do that job. So I was stupid enough to think, well, there's no reason I can't do that one. That should be fine.
Well, we'll get into a lot of the other series and things that you worked on. I mean, but you, like you said at the beginning, you played with all the toys of characters that you could create and stuff. So is there a process for you of, did you research, would you jump into earlier comic books? Cause like you have to deal with a lot of mythos of a lot of people when throughout the span of your career. So how would you prep for writing different books?
It mostly just familiarizing myself with what had recently happened.
Okay.
But it's not like I know there are some writers out there who, oh my, I'm going to do a Ghost Rider story. I have to read every Ghost Rider appearance ever. I have no interest in that. Like that's not how it works for me. If it works for somebody that way, I'm perfectly content to let them do that. But I don't want to tell stories about other stories. I just want to tell stories. So I get enough to familiarize myself, know where we've been recently, and more than anything, just kind of make sure that I understand the heart of the character, what makes the character tick. Once I have that, and I sort of have a sense of the playground, and obviously having read comics for years, you get a sense of the playground at Marvel and DC. You know what the sandbox is. Right. And then the job is just make stuff up.
That's awesome. So you started out working on Silver Surfer with Marvel. One of the first exposures I had with you was your run on Green Lantern with Kyle Rayner, being one of the co-creators of that. How did you make that switch from working on Marvel property, move over to DC to do Green Lantern?
Well, I started at Marvel and did the first couple years of my career at Marvel, really.
Mhm.
First 3, 4 or whatever. But but I had people like Jim Starlin and Bernie Wrightson and the other people that were around me sort of telling me how this worked, like telling me that you start at Marvel and then DC notices you, and you go do some work over there, and you either get embraced by DC and you go over there, or Marvel gets a little jealous and they make you a better offer, and it's you essentially play one against the other.
Yeah.
That's been going on in comics since there were a big two. So I had a sense of how this stuff worked, and um, had, I think Terry Austin was probably the one that introduced me around to DC editors, because he was doing stuff up there at the time. And ultimately, I think my first DC gigs were Green Lantern quarterly stories that Terry ended up inking over various and sundry pencilers, and got my foot in the door, got familiar with some of the editors up there who were also reading my Surfer stuff. And then so I had done a few DC things here and there, and then which helps you, you're a face, not just a name at that point.
Right.
And if you've done a few gigs, the editors know, well, this guy's not a flake, I can trust him. So when the Green Lantern opportunity came around, I got a call fairly late at night, like 9 o'clock at night, saying, hey, do you want to do Green Lantern? And then they explained to me the first storyline. So I kind of like had to go, oh, well, that's kind of a big deal. Can I think about this? And they're like, yeah, you can think about it for the weekend, but we got to have an answer by Monday. Because things were already late. They had decided that they were going to change directions for the story, and we had to get moving. So obviously I said yes.
Yeah. So I mean, well, that story obviously was you're transitioning out of a character that's been around for a long time with Hal Jordan. I know DC wanted to move in a different direction. What was kind of that conversation like? Was it like, how did you have free reign to kind of create the Kyle Rayner character that you wanted, or did they kind of say like, here's some what we want, we don't want, with Hal Jordan, and how'd that transition go? Because I know it's probably a big deal.
When they made me the offer, and I was like, oh, cool. I love that. I love that Hal Jordan costume, the Gil Kane stuff, and the whole, let's get back to doing, Hal as the test pilot, right stuff, Chuck Yeager kind of thing. And they're like, oh, well, hang on. here's what we have in mind. And they explained to me in a few sentences what Emerald Twilight was going to be about. And then sent me like a page and a half of notes of what Emerald Twilight was going to be. Like, here are the big beats of this storyline. So it was obviously a very, it was a radical departure from what had gone before. Certainly fueled by the success of Death of Superman and the Breaking of Batman. This was sort of the next one in the line, and was going to be permanent. That was, I'm always asked, oh, did you have a plan for, if this didn't work, did you have a plan for how you were going to get back? And nope, we never discussed it. Maybe DC had a plan, but I didn't, because I was never told we needed one. So I took their page and a half of notes and turned it into 3 issues of comics, which is the space that we were given. And then Darryl Banks and I, proud Columbus, Ohio resident, right? Darryl Banks, they just let us make up Kyle. They let us make up who he was, what he did, what he looked like, what the costume was like. They just kind of gave us free reign, and obviously approved it along the way. But we didn't have a whole lot of guidelines. They basically said, we want you to, we want the book to stay with a male hero, and we want it to be a human. We want it to be somebody from Earth. Other than that, there were no real guidelines.
So you got paired up with Darryl, and you guys kind of just got together and hashed it out of like, here's what we want, or kind of like you kind of lay some got, guidelines that you were thinking and then let Daryl just kind of play with it, or?
I came up with the character stuff and what his background was and the fact that he was going to be an artist, because because I really felt like this should be a special effects book. It's if he can make anything with the ring, let's make cool stuff. Let's not make boxing gloves and stuff like that, because been there, done that. So the idea was that he was going to make something cool with the ring every time. And kind of the unwritten rule for us was that he would never make the same thing twice. It was never like, if he made a giant robot, it had to be a completely different giant robot from the last time. So those were kind of the guidelines. And so I came up with basically what he looked like. Daryl came up with a costume from a number of different designs that were then sort of joined together. And his name came from, I knew I wanted to call him Kyle because I just liked the way it sounded, and I liked the Kyle Reese character from the Terminator movie. That's where his first name came from. And then the editor sent me a list of Irish surnames because I wanted him to be Irish. I was, that's a bit of my heritage. But it's always been a culture that I've been interested in, and I just thought it would be kind of cool. And sent me a list of Irish surnames, and I picked one.
Nice. So when you were working with Daryl, you said that one of the things that you wanted to make sure you guys had was that he never constructed the same thing twice. When it came to the constructs, was it kind of a merging of both your ideas, or was it like, hey, I want a train, or I want a robot here, or I want whatever it was? Or
yeah, I mean, I would suggest something in the script, giant robot or a sword or cartoon sheep or whatever it was, and then obviously Daryl's the one who brought it to life.
Yeah, that's so cool. So you went from Silver Surfer to then doing Green Lantern stuff, and then we hop into a period of time which is one of my favorites, is DC versus Marvel and the amalgam and the all access. And you were one of the writers throughout a lot of that stuff. Where can you kind of give a behind the scenes a little bit briefly of how that DC and Marvel came together? Because I know they did a little bit of some, like you said, crossovers with Teen Titans stuff before, but like this was the first kind of big deal, I think.
Well, it was the first sort of large scale, universe wide crossover. There had been, leading up to that, there had been different crossovers because, if you do a crossover, everybody makes some money.
Right.
Comics are a business. Publishers like to make money. And one of those crossovers being Green Lantern, Silver Surfer, which were both still selling because I was writing both of them at the same time. So fairly early on in my Green Lantern run, I was like, we should just do a Surfer book because I know the guy writing it. So it would work out just fine. So we got that approved. And then not that long after, I mean, Daryl was working on the Green Lantern Surfer pages. I got a call from Mike Carlin at DC, who was the executive editor-in-chief, basically, at DC, and he said, we're finally doing a Marvel versus DC, large-scale crossover. It's everybody. Do you want to be one of the writers on it? Duh.
Do I have a pulse? Yes.
So and that was really a reaction to the bottom kind of having dropped out of the direct market. The speculator boom burst, the bubble burst, and a lot of stores were in rough financial shape because they had overcommitted on a lot of different titles. They were all sitting on cases and cases of things they shouldn't have invested wildly in because all the speculators went away. So Marvel versus DC was really kind of the brainchild of, we need to get something into stores to keep the doors open for stores. Yeah. It was an attempt to pump a product into the direct market that people would be excited about, that would bring people back into comic book shops. So that's it was a big popcorn kind of project. And we met at the uptown Manhattan apartment of Mark Grunwald, who was the Marvel editor on the whole thing. Just me, Mark Grunwald, since he lived there. It would have been rude not to invite him to his own house. So it was me, Grooney, Mike Carlin, who was basically Grunwald's best friend, even though they worked at different publishers, and Peter David. And we kind of hashed out the whole series right there. There was not a lot. There was really nothing on paper for any of it. We just kind of made it all up on the spot. So the two giant brothers that that represented the universes and the contests, and like all of that stuff, and then all of the matchups we just kind of made up in Mark's apartment. And then Mike and Mark sort of let the other shoe drop of, after the third issue, we're going to do this amalgam thing for a month. And that was kind of the jaw hitting the floor moment. Like, we're going to do what? Obviously everybody expects Marvel and DC heroes to meet and to fight, and Superman takes on the Hulk and Batman takes on Captain America. Like, that's all expected. So the kind of the master stroke of it was, we're going to smash the universes together and come up with an entirely new universe. So that was terrifically cool. And at the at that meeting, when they said, because Mike and Mark had prepared the list of books that were going to be in the amalgam universe.
Okay.
They had the 12 of them already. I when they got to Doctor Strange Fate, I just said, I'm doing that one. That's the one I'm doing.
So they already had the characters mashed up of what they wanted, and then they showed you the list, and you're like, I want to do that book. Like,
that's the one I'm doing. Yeah, I was like, if I can't do that one, I'm walking out of here right now. Which was of course a lie. But and they were like, okay, you can do that one. So there are really no sort of deep dark secrets about it. It was just it was a big popcorn spectacle, and we had to get going on it as quickly as possible. So I volunteered to write the first issue because while we were sitting there, I had all of this stuff rolling around in my head. Sort of the Peter Parker, Clark Kent, Lois Lane faux love triangle, because they all worked at a newspaper, and like all of that stuff I just thought was, well, those are fun toys to play with.
Oh, for sure.
So I ended up doing the first issue and the third issue, and Peter and I kibitzed with each other certainly along the way, and had a fairly strong editorial hand from Mike and Mark, to making sure that everything went as planned. Yeah. But it was, once we hit the ground, we had to go. We really had to get it done, and within a week or two, we had the artists on board, because we went through a few different art choices before we settled upon the people, upon Dan Jurgens on the DC side and Claudio Castellini on the Marvel side, to draw it, because there were other people that were on the list, but they were all involved in other projects, and the difficulty of rescheduling everybody was not something that we had time for. We had to get going, and frankly, some guys were like, no, I'll just keep, I'll keep doing X-Men or whatever book they were on at the time.
Yeah. Well, it was one of the things that was so cool was in the back of each issue of the DC versus Marvel, there were, kind of profile cards of the characters, so you could familiarize yourself. But one of my favorite ones was in the back of issue 4, where it was all the creators, and they had creator profile cards, and you were one of the profile cards that they had, and they had a special skill. Do you remember what you put down as your special skill?
I do not at all. Frankly, I didn't even remember there were cards.
Yeah, so there were like these character bio profile things of like where they're from, what they did. And so like it was like you hung out, yours was like volleyball league, but your special skill was diaper changing.
Well, I had a newborn at the time. So really, other than writing and trying to sleep, that was the only thing I did.
So it was natural. So I'm assuming if you had that chance again, you probably would switch your special skill then.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Now I would say curling. It's my new thing as of two nights ago. Curling is my new thing.
So naturally, you write comics, now you're taking over, and we'll see you in the next Winter Olympics.
Oh, totally, totally. It's one of those things where you go, see it on TV, and you go, oh, I can do that. And yeah, you really can, but you probably fall on your face a few times first.
Well, you guys heard it here first. Ron's going to be in the Olympics next year, next time for curling. So, well, you said that they kind of had this list of characters from the amalgam, and you picked Dr. Strange Fate. Did you then get to? I'm assuming they didn't have all the characters that were mashed up in the book created. Was that your kind of choice, or did they?
Right. It was mainly the main cat, like the title characters of the amalgam books were sorted out, and then everything else was a free for all. Everything else was, well, I want to have this character and this character put together as a supporting character in my book. So honestly, there was a lot of coordination between Mike and Mark to keep all of that stuff straight. So and basically it was, to a great extent, it was first come first serve. If you asked for somebody and nobody else had claimed that character, you generally got it. So I ended up with the supporting characters that I had in my book, simply because I asked for them.
Right. And it makes sense, and probably why Access showed up in Doctor Strange Fate a little bit more than the others, because you were writing the main series that kind of branched off of too.
Right. We sort of worked it out that Strange Fate would be somewhat integral to the storyline. There would at least be a through line in that book, since obviously I could be the guy that was coordinating stuff, which is why, like, Strange Fate is in the trade paperback for Marvel versus DC. It's the only kind of stray book that actually is in the main storyline.
Now, when they made that, I know you said they had that list of the mashups. There technically is 3 characters that are mashed up in Doctor Strange Fate with that character. Did they kind of have of who was under the helmet as something that they wanted, or was that kind of like, would it be cool if?
That was a long discussion, and there's one of the reasons that reveal isn't until the last page of the story is because we couldn't get permission from Marvel until we were well into the book. And Marvel finally said, oh, okay. So the fact that the person under the helmet in Doctor Strange Fate, spoilers, 25 years later, is Charles Xavier, is because that's who I asked for. He wasn't claimed anywhere else. And really that came from those early Claremont Byrne X-Men issues where Professor X was in Egypt and he was having, a psychic battle with Amal Farouk, and there was a little Indiana Jones-ish. So I had always liked those issues, and I thought, well, that would be cool to play off of, is that, and when Charles Xavier was in Egypt in that time, he ends up with going to the pyramid and getting the helm of Nebu, and so that's why he was under the mask. But we were more than halfway through the pages of the book before we got permission. We had to really twist some arms up at Marvel in the X-Men office to give us Xavier. They were kind of saving him, and we were like, this is the coolest thing ever, so you should give him to us rather than use him somewhere else. So that's why he's in the book, is because I sort of I wheeled for it. And actually that last page of the issue, the original to that, hangs over on my wall there.
Oh, that's got to be a thing of beauty to look at all the time.
It's when you have a Jose Luis Garcia Lopez inked by Kevin Nolan page hanging on your wall, it's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, you're doing all right then. You're doing all right. Well, one thing that I noticed when I was prepping for the interview, that I didn't know about until recently, you also are involved with writing video games, and you had a hand on one of my favorites of Marvel Ultimate Alliance 2. Like, how did you get into writing video games alongside comics?
There is a local developer here and has been for, geez, I think it's been here for 30 years. I obviously didn't do work for him for 30 years, but probably within the last 15 to 18 years, probably 15 years. I ran into, when we moved back from Florida after the crosstown experience, moved to the Albany, New York area. I ran into somebody, an artist who knew some guys who worked at the local video game place. And he said, "Hey, these guys are looking for somebody to help them out with a video game. Can I give them your name?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. Why not?" So they got in touch, and it turned out that the guy who got in touch was actually an ex-Marvel editor. Somebody named Evan Skolnick, who I had done some work for at Marvel, and he was now working on video games. So they actually brought me in to work on Ultimate Alliance 2, Spider-Man video game tie-in for the movie Spider-Man 2. I think I ended up writing dialogue for Tobey Maguire. I think he did the dialogue. And so I've worked on and off for this place called Vicarious Visions for a chunk of time. I would sit here and work, or I'd go into their office and do some stuff on various and sundry bunch of different Skylanders games. Destiny I worked on when they were working with Bungie. And now Vicarious Visions is actually called Blizzard East or Blizzard Albany.
Okay.
They are a Blizzard subsidiary. So I'm not going to tell you exactly what I'm doing for them, but you can probably figure it out. So that's one of my gigs right now.
Nice. So you're still doing some stuff, and you're currently working on something.
Yeah, doing a lot of stuff for them right now.
That's awesome.
And it's great. I'm working with a really great narrative team, half based here, half based in Irvine, and working on a AAA franchise that's just we're again, I'm not going to tell you which game it is, but we're well into the development of it, and there's a full playable game that looks great.
That's awesome. Now, I'm assuming that the process for writing, scripts for video game is a little different than writing for a comic book.
It's comic books are, you get together with 5 of your closest friends and you make a book,
right?
And you're kind of you kind of do your thing off by yourself, and everybody kind of has their role, and there's interaction, but it's it's not a huge raft of people that put together a comic. Video game, it's you and 600 of your closest friends, because there's so much to do. These games are vast. They're like making a movie. And it's a multi-year process. So they're both hugely satisfying and creatively, but the comic is very much yours, and the video game is very much ours, because there are so many different people that have their hands on it, and even the narrative team that I'm part of is like a dozen people. So there's a game director, but there's no one person who kind of dictates everything. It's the work of many people, and you do your piece. You do what the work is divvied up, and you kind of, obviously you have a hand in it, and you help other people and all that. But like today, I was in a meeting and I looked at the previs for a scene that I had written, with characters walking around and doing things, and it's just very cool.
That's awesome.
It's a, like I said, it's a different experience, but it's very satisfying in just a very different way.
So you were busy because you're actively working on video games, and I said at the beginning of the show you have comics that you're working on right now, and 2 in particular that I'm very familiar with. So first one I wanted to touch base with you on is from Aftershock, Almost Americans. If someone's listening to this and they haven't gotten to pick up Almost Americans, what's this? What is it about? Where did this premise kind of come about from?
Almost American is actually a true story. It's a 5-issue miniseries from Aftershock. 4 issues are out now. The 5th issue will be out March 30th. What is today, Wednesday? We just sent issue 5 off to press yesterday.
Oh, cool.
And it is the real life story of a couple of Russian intelligence operatives who ended up having to flee Russia, ended up in the Dominican Republic, speaking to the American consulate down there, and were brought to the United States as intelligence assets. And this is the real life story of what happened to them. The ups and downs and getting caught in the red tape of the American government, fleeing the red tape and worse of the Russian government. So my job in this was to sort of take all of the material from various articles, and also just from conversations with the people, with principally the husband, because it was a husband and wife who the story's about, Janos Neumann or Newman. So we talked a lot. Like I sort of gathered all of this material that they sent me, figured out how to tell this story, and then I just spent a lot of time on the phone, basically just having conversations and letting him tell me stories, and working a lot of those stories, a lot of those anecdotes into the framework that the research material kind of lended itself to.
Was this a story, that you were familiar with? Was it brought to you, or did you kind of hear about it and say, I want to investigate this more?
Aftershock came to me in the person of Mike Marz, the editor-in-chief, who I've known for years, going back to, Mike's worked at Marvel, and I've known Mike since he worked at Wizard way back in the day. So Mike came to me and said, "Hey, we've got this thing that feels like you might be a good fit for," and I don't even know if Mike knew that I was a journalist in a former life, but that actually came into play with sort of taking this information and figuring out how to arrange it into a story. So it's sort of like the where comics and journalism overlap in the Venn diagram.
Nice. So was it then? So this was more of a unique style for writing the comic for you then, because this was more, you had a source material that you kind of had to follow along with more than you had the freedom of some of the other. When you're writing,
right? Yeah, usually when you do a comic, you're just making stuff up. That's right. That's the job. You get to decide that that's Charles Xavier under the helmet of Dr. Fate, just because it seems like a good idea. For this, it was very much a situation of trying to, as much as possible, trying to stick to the facts. I tried not to embroider much anywhere. There's a few places where some situations got truncated a little bit, characters were smushed together, like you would normally see in say like a film or TV treatment, right, of a real life situation. But the vast majority of everything that's in the book is exactly what happened.
Yeah. Was this something, doing this comic, writing this comic, and being so unique from your other comics, is this something that like you would explore more of, doing some more like historical aspects of comics, working into it? Or was this like, this was fun, but I'd rather play with just being able to make stuff up?
It kind of flexes different muscles. So I would totally be up for doing it again. Whatever sort of real life, whatever, you can tell any kind of story you want in comics, right?
Right.
Real life, biography, whatever it is, you can, comics are a vehicle to tell stories. They're not a vehicle to tell superhero stories. They're just a vehicle to tell stories. So it all, to me, it's all, it all works however you want to do it. So I would certainly do this again, but it was in some ways more difficult because you couldn't just go, well, what would be cool now? What a
Yeah.
cool cliffhanger would be now. It doesn't work like that. You kind of gotta sort it out and make the, you're building a framework to hang the story on, but you don't get to pick and choose what lumber you use. It's you have to use what's provided for you.
That's cool. That's that's got to be, it had to have been a fun experience trying to, like you said, figure out how to do it and flex, like you said, flex different muscles, because you've been doing this for a long time. And I gotta say, it's got to probably be cool though. Your other series that you're working on that's currently right now going on is the Silver Surfer series again, and you're back with Ron Lim again. And for that being your first comic, Silver Surfer, to get to go back to that character again, what was that like for you?
It's totally, come full circle, right?
Right.
It's literally the first script I ever wrote was a Silver Surfer script. And now I'm doing it all over again. And it was, it was just, that was just a phone call from an editor at Marvel, who said, hey, what would you think about this? And, I didn't have to think about it too much. I mean, I had to think about how I was going to fit it in my schedule, but there was no way I was going to actually say no, because it was just too, one, it was, I was sort of hoping I'd get a chance to go back to Surfer at some point, because, obviously it's been quite a while since I've written the character. And when I left the Surfer book, when I left the monthly, I felt like, all right, I've done 50 some issues. I've kind of said what I needed to say. Right. And now of course 50 issues is, nobody gets to do 50 issues. No. But then it was not uncommon. So I decided, all right, that's 50, however many issues. By the time you add all the specials and the one shot, that's probably 60 or 70. But okay, I've done my bit here. Let's do something else. But obviously, it's kind of the first time you fell in love, and you want to go back to that relationship a little bit. So, so being able to go back and do that, particularly go back and do it with Ron, was, it's just more fun than I should be allowed to have.
Right.
When Ron's pages, spill into my inbox and I get to see, what he's taken from up here and put on the page, it's like we're 25-year-old kids again.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be cool because you also got to revisit Green Lantern. You had a story in the 80th anniversary special and you got to do that story again with Daryl Banks. So like it had to be, you get to kind of see those characters that, one that was your first in comics, one that you created, go create, like those have got to just be cool, and to get to do it with the original people that you got to work with, that's got to be fun.
Yeah, it's it's like putting on a comfy hoodie that fits just right, and I was surprised at how quickly I just settled back into how the Surfer works and his perspective and all that stuff. I mean, within a few pages of the first issue, it was just like, oh yeah, I remember what this works like. It's obviously it's a cliche, but it really is kind of just like riding a bike.
Yeah. Well, what's so cool is, as someone who was, reading Silver Surfer, as a kid, I've had conversations with other YouTubers who are like, we're reading this series and we're going, just like it was taking you back, you and Run back. It's like, it's taking us back as readers going, holy cow, this feels just like we did. And we got that. I get that same excitement reading it as I did as a kid, because it's the same writing, it's the same art. And as obviously as things change and evolve through time, it has that feeling of the gang's all back together. And
yeah, I look, the stuff that I'm a big proponent of the stuff that you fall in love with at 10, 11, 12 years old is the stuff that sticks with you the rest of your life. Yeah. Good, bad, or indifferent, the stuff that you discover at just the right age is the stuff that means the world to you 30, 40, 50 years later. That's certainly the case for me. the books and comics and movies that I, was just the right age for are still huge influences, huge favorites for me. Even though, as an adult, sometimes you look back at that stuff and go, well, it wasn't that great, but it's still, you still love it. So I realized that like I have that feeling of nostalgia working on the book. So I know that people who discovered that book at that time, when I was still new to it, when Ron was new to it, I know it, I know it means something. It's not a responsibility I take lightly. So we wanted to make sure that that we didn't, this wasn't just an excuse for a nostalgia trip, that we,
Right.
We did all the stuff that you loved the first time around, and are giving you a worthy story in 2022 in addition.
Yeah, so because at the time we're recording this, only 2 issues are out right now. Otherwise, unless I've completely missed one,
Just
and I'll
two,
be
yeah.
upset. Okay. So
Yeah, just 2. Issue 3 will be out March 30th, along
because
with
they just did a second printing was out today, right?
yeah, second printing of number 1 came out today, which I guess means we sold a lot of books.
Right.
That's good. And we're basically done. I mean,
Okay.
I've got to go through issue 5 and polish the dialogue, but I've actually got issue 4's letters sitting in my inbox that I have to proof for tomorrow, and then go through and polish the dialogue for issue 5, and all the art's done. It's nice to be ahead of the curve and not not chasing the deadline train.
So this is a 5-issue series.
Mm-hmm.
How, and it obviously takes place from reading the first 2 in the universe that you both created earlier in the Silver Surfer, or at least that's what it feels like. So
right. It's they being Marvel asked us to do a story that could fit in our run somewhere.
Okay.
And they really said, do you want it to be specific? Do you want it to be between issues 84 and 85? Do you want to get that specific with it? And I was like, nope. I don't want to tell stories about other stories.
Right.
So there's this story probably takes place somewhere between issues 75 and 100 for our run, but where specifically that is, I don't, you can decide, and I don't think it matters, frankly. Stories are stories. So so it's in that time frame. There's nothing to put the lie to that, but there's also nothing to tell you specifically this happened between panels 4 and 5 of page 16 of issue 85. Like that's not how I approach stories. So I just told them, yeah, we don't need to do that part of it.
Like, whatever you want to put it in, we'll put it in. You can tell. I won't tell you it's wrong. So as we're wrapping up, I was on the internet, and I'm a collectible guy, and I noticed that soon, I think very soon, action figures from the Justice League Endless Winter are going to be coming out, and that is something that you also were working on. Like, is that something like that geeks you up at, like, hey, this is something I helped create, specifically like a character to your book, as I see you have collectibles behind you and stuff like.
It's cool, but
yeah,
it's not like, oh my God, there's an action figure from a villain I created. It's great, and I'm glad, and I'm proud of it. But I'm a lot more excited about this stuff behind me that I had nothing to do with creating than I am about something I created. It's just, I don't know, I guess it's just my nature. Like I said, I'm thrilled that that those figures exist. I didn't know they existed until McFarlane announced it on the on the internet, and I was like, wait a minute, what? There's going to be a what? I had no idea. So that was a very pleasant surprise. So it's cool, and I hope other people like it. That's really as much as I really think about it.
Right.
Because I I didn't get into doing what I'm doing to create action figures. I
Right.
do it to tell stories. The action figures are a really, really lovely bonus.
Well, Ron, I've talked, and I could talk to you about comics forever. We haven't even cracked half your catalog, but I want to be respectful of your time. So I hesitate to ask, do you have anything else that you're working on comic book wise? I know you said you're working on a video game right now that is a little hush hush, and that's but is there comic books that you're working on that you can talk about, or is that also
Um,
kind of under wraps?
yeah, there's always stuff. So in April, there's there's going to be a Project Superpowers miniseries from Dynamite, written by me and Andy Lanning, who I co-wrote Endless Winter with for DC. So that starts, I think, first week of April. It's Project Superpowers Fractured States, which is set in the near future in a slightly different America.
Okay.
So we're playing with the Project Superpowers characters. That starts in April. My Swamp God serial continues in Heavy Metal magazine. And in fact, where are my comps? They just showed up 2 days ago. Oh, here we go. So Swamp God is a
awesome.
Civil War era horror series set in the Deep South, in a swamp, as you might gather. So that's being serialized in Heavy Metal magazine, and also gets printed as single issues too. So that's currently coming out. There's another Heavy Metal serial that we will start on, that Andy and I will actually start on later in the year. There's a graphic novel that Andy and I wrote together for the Twilight Imperium board game.
Okay.
Which is basically done. So there's that. There's a whole list. And I'm also Rick Leonardi is one of my best buddies in this business. Rick and I did a 130-page original graphic novel for Naval Institute Press called Blue Angel, which is principally Rick's story that I kibitzed on, and I'm writing the dialogue. And it is a military story with overtones of superpowers in it. So it's very much set in the real world, set during the Gulf conflicts, with all of the proper military hardware that you would expect from Naval Institute Press, from their Dead Reckoning imprint, which is their graphic novel imprint. And that will be out in late 2022. In fact, I think if you look up Blue Angel Marz Leonardi on Amazon, they just released the cover. So
sweet.
So there's that, and there's a few other things that haven't been announced yet. So there's and I'm working on a TV gig so there's other than work and curling, there's not a whole lot that goes on around here.
You're staying busy. Staying busy.
Work, curling in the gym is about all that there's time for.
I love it that curling is taking over your life. So I'm hoping eventually it's going to make its way subtly into a comic at some point.
Yeah, now that of course I'm an expert at it.
Naturally.
I've done it like 1.5 times now. I'm obviously can speak with authority on the whole thing. I've done it 1.5 times and I didn't fall. So to me, that's a pretty good sign.
Right. So there we go. Well, Ron, if people want to follow along with all the projects that you have going on, and as you release news about them, what's the best way they can stay up to date with you?
Twitter's the easiest one, which is just @RonMarz. My website is ronmarz.com. That would make sense. And the website will actually be relaunching in the next few weeks. Nice. It's been sort of dormant and just sitting there. So we're kind of getting that spruced up, and we'll do all the things you're supposed to have on a website, new releases and interviews and appearances. We'll have a store and all of that cool stuff that I've been putting off for years, actually making up stories. We're finally going to get that done. There's a Facebook page that I don't run, and there's an Instagram page that I need to pay more attention to, but mostly it's Twitter.
Okay, so Twitter is, and I'll have links to everything you mentioned in the description of this video. But Ron, thank you again, just taking some time out of your day to talk about comics with me.
No problem. It's my pleasure. It's a nice break from work.
Yeah. So, well, with that being said, gang, hopefully you can find some time to curl up, grab a book, and nerd out. Peace.